To begin then. Okay, so welcome everyone to this digital talk hosted by Asfar. If you're not sure what Asfar is, it's a UK-based NGO focused on the issues of peace building and reconciliation through working with young people. So to kick things off, I'll introduce myself first, the speakers and the digital talk program quickly. So my name is Jacob Allard. I'm a European Solidarity Corps volunteer here in Sarajevo. And I'll be moderating this call today with Emma Ferraris. So if you have any questions, queries or problems, please send them over to us in the chat and we'll answer them as quickly as we can. So what are the digital talks? Well, since the start of lockdown in many countries this year, we started this project as a way of keeping young people engaged in issues related to peace and reconciliation, as well as the broader themes in the regions we focus on, which include the Balkans and Bosnia and Herzegovina, using a series of Zoom talks. So we're delighted to welcome Emad and Sharon of the Middle East Treaty Organization to talk to us today. And we'd really like this to be an open dialogue, so there will be time for Q&A at the end. So I won't go into too much detail about the speakers and their respective journeys in peace, disarmament and campaigning, because that's covered in the talk. But I'll finish instead with a quick note. So if after the talk you're interested in finding out more, as I anticipate and hope you will be, about the Middle East Treaty Organization and the broader issue of disarmament, we'll put the link to their website in the chat. And similarly, if you'd like to find out more about what Asfar does and the great opportunities it provides for young people, we'll provide a link for that too. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Emad and Sharon for this digital talk, an Israeli and an Iranian talk about nuclear weapons. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jacob, and many thanks to Asfar for inviting us and organizing this important topic of discussion for us today. I'm going to jump in. I'm Emad Kiyaei. I'm one of the directors of the Middle East Treaty Organization. I am the Iranian, if you wanted to know. And my journey into disarmament, nuclear discussions, and so forth dates back for over a decade. And I got involved primarily to see how we can bring about a diplomatic resolution to Iran's nuclear program in its discussions with world powers. Now that led to engaging with a lot of stakeholders, from governments to NGOs to diplomats and experts, on how we can actually have a technical solution to resolving the concerns over Iran's nuclear program, but also how do we create the political will by many countries on the global scene to not opt for war and instead towards negotiations and diplomacy. We'll get into that a little bit further down the line if you guys have more questions about my personal journey through this whole easy topic of nuclear disarmament. But today, let's have a quick check-in with the global scene when it comes to nuclear weapons. There are 9 countries that have nuclear weapons. From those 9, 5 of them are what are known as the UN permanent members of the Security Council: France, UK, Russia, China, and the United States. And between them, they have a lot of nuclear weapons. Just for example, United States and Russia together have approximately 92% of the globe's nuclear warheads in their possession. Now, there's also 4 other countries that are also outside of what is known as the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which binds countries to get rid of their nuclear weapons or never build one. Those 4 countries are North Korea, Pakistan, India, and Israel. The last one is going to be important for us because we're going to zoom into the Middle East, and that's where our focus is going to be in this talk. In the Middle East, where is it? Well, it's in the middle of nowhere, but it's actually in West Asia. It constitutes 22 Arab countries plus Iran and Israel. And these 24 countries are right now what we are working as a Middle East Treaty Organization, trying to push them to a binding agreement and a treaty to establish a weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East, which means we don't want nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, or biological weapons anywhere in this region. And for that, some of the governments have to get rid of those types of weapons of mass destruction, and others have to promise not to build them. When it comes to the Middle East, there's only one country that has a nuclear weapon. That's Israel. But there's other countries that are developing quite advanced nuclear programs. And that's when Iran comes in, because Iran has got one of the most advanced nuclear programs that, if it decides to, can be diverted to build nuclear weapons. So it's always a concern. Will they do it or not? And we're trying our best to make sure that the Iranian government continues to not make a decision to build nuclear weapons. And for that, we want to have a regional solution, a regional approach on making sure none of the countries pursue such weapons of mass destruction. Why are they weapons of mass destruction? Because once they are exploded, they create enormous amount of harm, and they're indiscriminate on what they kill and what they destroy, and also damages a great deal our environment. So we don't want these weapons anywhere to be used, but our focus being the Middle East, in one of the most troubled and volatile regions, is where we are focusing our work. The Middle East Treaty Organization is a network of civil society, activists, practitioners, experts, with a singular goal of eradicating weapons of mass destruction from the Middle East. And we do that through policy work, through a draft treaty that assists in providing avenues and directions to diplomats that eventually have to negotiate and make a binding agreement, like other treaties around the world, to establish such a geographical area free from weapons of mass destruction. We also do educational outreach and also work on making sure that the right information is put out there with lots of avenues besides war. But it's not just that. We believe that if we can make progress towards a WMD-free zone in the Middle East, it will open up so much more opportunities to address a long list of problems that are facing the Middle East. May that be the conflicts that are happening on conventional arms, may that be what is happening to our environment with climate challenges, to water crisis, to immigration, migration, and a whole of other issues that deal with socio-economic and political factors. And what we are considering as human security, because we just are not only concerned about hard security of the state, but also what it means human security is our well-being and the well-being of the ecology around us and the environment around us. So how can we coexist and make sure that the Middle East can thrive and be in peace and have some prosperity? And for that, we need to bring a lot of people together. And that is why Sharon, myself, and a group of others are working together from within the region and outside to make sure that we can make a dent in the psyche of those decision makers in seeing the benefit of having a WMD-free zone in the Middle East as a starting point of a conversation, discussion, and a process that can bring a lot of people that usually don't talk to each other around a table, so they can solve their problems through diplomacy and multilateralism, and not through the barrel of the gun or the use of weapons of mass destruction. So for that, there's a lot happening in the Middle East, as you must imagine. And when it comes to at least our work, this is the proof in the pudding, that Sharon as an Israeli, myself as an Iranian, and our growing team that composes of many from the Middle East, are actually the fact that we don't have to even talk about a future vision, but the vision is already becoming a reality, where people that are seemingly supposed to be enemies are working together for a common goal of peace, security, and the eradication of weapons of mass destruction. I'm going to stop here, pass it on to Sharon, and we will go back and forth a little bit, and then we will open it up to Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Emad. So I'll go backwards. I'll go to how we started a little bit. Not how the zone started, not how the Middle East started, of course, by the Brits and the British and the French, but to how we started. So in 2007, Greenpeace International have decided to have experiments on humans and asked me to do a campaign on nuclear disarmament in Israel. The idea was that through Greenpeace, which is an international organization, we can try to do something that before seemed almost impossible. I mean, we all knew that Vanunu talked about nuclear weapons and was in prison for the rest, kind of for the rest of his life, because he's free. Vanunu was the whistleblower on Dimona, the Israeli nuclear facility. And apart from that, we knew that we're not supposed to talk about it. That's it. So Greenpeace International have decided to try and do a campaign in Israel. And I can tell you that in the first year, the vast majority of our work was to find out whether we can or cannot do a campaign in Israel. And it was a funny year. I mean, really at the beginning, even some of my friends thought that the idea of even talking about nuclear weapons is so dangerous that I might disappear. I mean, people were very dramatic about it, which was a bit silly. But that shows you what ambiguity, what a secret is making when we're not supposed to talk about something. But I can tell you that the first thing that happens when you're not supposed to talk about something is that you become a bit stupid about it, or a bit dramatic about it. And I can tell you that the first year, really, we haven't had an idea. How do you campaign about something you're not supposed to talk about? Do we fight the ambiguity, or do we fight the nuclear weapons? And very quickly, and basically because I'm a very impatient person, I realized I'm not going to fight ambiguity. If I'll fight ambiguity, I'll do exactly what they want me to. Let's talk about the secret instead of talking about the weapons. So we've decided that the first thing we're doing is to talk about the weapons and not about ambiguity, and by that, put a dent into ambiguity. And it's not because we are against Israel's security. As Israelis, we kind of like Israel to be secure, but because we think that ambiguity is dangerous to Israel's security, almost as the weapons themselves. We had a nice opportunity. As a group of activists in Greenpeace, we were thinking, what is it that we can do to raise some awareness and for the media to actually show it? Because the problem was that we could have done many things, yet it doesn't mean that the media will show it if the media think that they're not supposed to talk about it or to interview us about it and so on. So we had a very interesting opportunity when the Tel Aviv University, a few months into the beginning of the campaign in Israel, decided to do a full day of a panel after panel from 9 a.m. till 6 p.m. on nuclear threats in the Middle East. And of course, from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., all panels were by male speakers, not even one woman to talk about nuclear threats in the Middle East. And of course, all the panelists were talking about Iran. Now, Iran doesn't possess nuclear weapons. Israel does. Now, and I'm not saying that Israel is the only nuclear threat to the Middle East, but it's the only state that possesses nuclear weapons. And at the same time, all the discussions were, how do we stop Iran? And mainly, how do we attack Iran? And we thought it's a good opportunity for us to maybe share a different perspective, especially when the audience is from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense, and the ex-military, and so on. The first speaker was then President Shimon Peres, who also is the father of the Dimona factory, and the father of Israel's nuclear program. And we thought, how do we get in? And it's a long story. Maybe if there's time later, I'll tell you how we got in. And how can we get in front of the cameras and yet not to look threatening? You can't run towards a president. If you run towards a president, you might be shot because you look like a threat. So how do we do it in a very peaceful way, what we call NVDA, nonviolent direct action? So how do we look nonviolent? How do we get as close to the president as possible with our message, and yet not look at a threat? And of course, the answer was getting undressed. When you're undressed, you don't pose a threat, especially if you raise your hands. So you can't conceal weapons. You're very interesting for the media, and you can walk very close to the president. And that's exactly what we've done. When the president stood to talk, our activists took off their clothes, opened the banners saying, stripping the Middle East of weapons of mass destruction. And for the first time, we got to all of the media. And when I say all of the media, I'm talking about not just the media in Israel. The media in Israel ignored us in the first hour, but BBC, in Iran, in Press TV, basically we were on CNN, we were on Fox News, we were all around the world. Everybody showed the naked activists in front of Shimon Peres, and if you look it up in Google, I actually never tried it because it was in 2007, but you might even find some pictures, and if not, one day I'll share. This was a great beginning for the campaign in Israel, because suddenly the media in Israel had to address it. Everybody else in the world were talking about it, and they had to interview us, because they couldn't ignore something that was already on social media and everybody else were talking about. But at the end of the day, and even though we had a very successful campaign with Greenpeace and with the international campaign against nuclear weapons, and even though after years of campaigning in Israel, we were able to really get to as many people as possible and get them to be with us on the understanding that nuclear weapons are dangerous, that the only way to have a safe world is if we're eliminating this threat. At the same time, there was always this perception that Israel should be the last to disarm, that it's not safe for Israelis to disarm. And the reason is that because Israel doesn't feel safe within the Middle East. So one thing was for sure that we're campaigning not for a nuclear weapon-free zone, but for a weapon of mass destruction-free zone, for both reasons. First, so Israel is not isolated and not the only state possessing, but is in a group of states possessing, so it might be more safe for Israel to join the table. And second, because there is usage of weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East, and therefore they should be eliminated. I mean, we have so many wars here, we have so many fractions. There must be done something to stop the threat that in one of these incidents there will be more usage, as we saw in Syria, of chemical weapons, of biological weapons, or with nuclear weapons. When we looked at all the panels, UN resolutions, talks, when we interviewed Israelis and Arabs and Iranians and other internationals, one thing came across is that, yeah, everybody thinks it's a good idea, but nobody believes it's possible. Nobody believes it's possible. And that's where we started to work regionally. We started at the beginning as a regional peace and disarmament movement, and that then became METO, to hold roundtables in all kinds of places, but also in Israel. We mapped the obstacles. Why do people believe that it is impossible to have a weapon of mass destruction-free zone in the Middle East? And when we analyzed all the data of why it is impossible, it became very, very clear that the only reason it's impossible is because they think it's impossible. And because for most of the states in the region, even the non-nuclear ones, it's much easier to live things as they are. Basically, most states in the region, or at least the leaders, are feeling okay with the situation because it allows them either to be right, to be angry, to feel safe, to keep dividing the Middle East the way they do, and so on. And then we decided to do a trial. What if we'll map all the possibilities, all the components, all the things that needs to be in a draft treaty, or in a treaty for the zone, and see if we can find something. And the point was that we did. If they said it was impossible, it was very possible to write a treaty or a draft treaty for the Middle East. And when we showed it to the diplomats, the same ones that said it was impossible, we said one thing. Now you can't say it's impossible. So if it is possible, it's up to you to achieve it. We didn't write a treaty to shove it down the throat and say, take it or leave it, because we knew that that would be the end of the initiative. We said, this is the beginning of a discussion. And it's this discussion, we're talking about possibilities. So don't fight with us over the text. Take it, change it. It's an open source. Do whatever you want with it. There's only one condition. You can't say it's impossible anymore. Did I pass my time by a lot?
Okay.
That's fine.
Emad.
All right. So Sharon is telling us that through this writing of the draft treaty and providing it to the diplomats, we removed one key obstacle, the belief that it's impossible. And not only that, the process of writing a draft treaty is not just writing it. You know, we bring a lot of experts, we have roundtables, we bring governments, officials in their personal capacity, and to sit down and delve into the text and say what is their views and what they think the views of their governments are. And this allows this draft treaty to be constantly evolving. And that in itself continues the process of engaging with these individuals who ultimately either advise their governments or are part of the government, because treaties cannot be signed by Sharon and myself and Jacob and others. It has to be signed by governments. And those governments sit down in places like the United Nations and negotiate, and then they give commitments of their governments to making sure that they abide by whatever agreement they've come up with. So the draft treaty not only provides a text that is technically sound, but it also provides options on key issues of how do we enforce it, what are the geographical boundaries of a WMD-free zone, what is the verifications to make sure that countries that sign on to it will open up their country to monitoring and inspections, so we can make sure that these countries are not seeking weapons of mass destruction. So technically, fantastic. Bringing all of these characters together that usually don't even recognize each other. Don't forget, a lot of countries in the Middle East don't even recognize Israel. There are many countries in the Middle East that have a lot of issues with Iran. Iran has a lot of issues with other countries in the Middle East. There's a lot of wars going on, parties that are literally fighting against each other. For example, in Yemen, you have Iran supporting the Houthi rebels, while Saudi Arabia is supporting the former government of Yemen. These wars are being played out, what is known as proxy wars between regional powers that want to have influence in every corner of the Middle East. But it gets even more complicated because global powers that we talked about, those P5, are also involved. The Russians are involved in here. The United States has been involved in the Middle East. The British and the French historically have had a great role in carving up the Middle East and causing all of this trouble in the first place. And of course, the increasing involvement of China economically and politically in many of the countries in the Middle East. So we have global powers interfering. We have regional powerhouses like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, by extension, maybe even Turkey and Iran playing their different sort of biddings in different parts of the conflicts across the region. And then when you zoom in even further and you go on a national level, you have countries that are really at the brink of failed states because they are increasingly under civil war and are entangled in their own domestic turmoil. This is the picture of the Middle East. In this climate, this is why it's important to get rid of these WMDs or their future use. So we provide a technical solution through this draft treaty, and the process of bringing these characters into a roundtable and discussing it creates something very simple but powerful, that you and I are not that different in what we seek for our national interest, but also for our region. Everybody, as Sharon has mentioned, for the Israeli government, its security is important, but its security cannot be guaranteed in a maximalist position by having everybody else insecure, and vice versa. So we have to find a regional solution that addresses what are the concerns of these countries, why do they have disagreements and animosity among each other, and the best way for them to figure it out is to actually be sitting face to face and realizing that if you cut yourself, your blood is going to be red, even if you're an Israeli, even if you're an Iranian, or if you're an Arab. So that in itself makes us united as a human race. And what we want in the region is the same and ambitious and dreams and visions of others around the world. Safety, security, prosperity. And this is one of the gateways. This is one of the initiatives that can get us there. And the best part is, which is very important, is belief. Belief that it is possible. And here is where our energy comes in. This is where civil society comes in. That we have to break from what the status quo is being fed to us, that we can never have peace in the Middle East, that things cannot improve in the Middle East. That is a load of bollocks. There are many of us in the region and outside that believe that there is a better path forward. And for that, we need to provide as much as resources to the voices of peace so that we can dilute and put onto the side those who are seeking violence to achieve their ends. And that, the irony is, requires responsibility from those people who live in the countries, those powerful countries that I told you about. You know, these guns and weapons of mass destruction programs don't appear out of thin air. They appear with the direct support of many of these world powers. The fact that the United States is the largest seller of weapons in the world and the biggest recipient of those weapons comes to the Middle East, half of it goes to that region. And if you look at the biggest buyers are Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. When you look at the military aid that the United States provides, the number one recipient is Israel, then Egypt. When we look at this region, we have to also hold accountable those global powers that continue to flood the region with the means of war instead of the means for peace. So we want to change that calculation. We want to change the whole thing and turn it upside down and show that there's a way forward. And for that, we will also require a lot of help from whoever is here and whoever will be listening and watching this later on. And every one of us can play a part. And the reason why I'm saying that, and I mean it, is because every single treaty, convention that deals with limiting the powers of those warmongers has started by civil society. And if you look at the major movements across the world or in the United States, may that be the civil rights movement or many other movements for women's rights and others, if you had to wait until the governments move, we will still be having slavery today and we'll still be having carnage today. So we've got to say no to war and we've got to take action and do our part. And if you want to learn more how to do your part, there's many ways you can get involved with amazing organizations, including Middle East Treaty Organization. I'm sure that Jacob will provide us some of those details later on. Sharon?
Amen. So no, seriously, it was so good. I feel like I'll ruin everything you just said. So what I want to tell you is lately we are working on something new and exciting for us. And there are many reasons why we're doing it, and I'll tell you what it is. We're calling it Remapping the Middle East. The idea of remapping the Middle East came first from understanding that we ourselves don't understand the Middle East enough. There are some assumptions, some things that we just used to say, and we haven't had time to stop, breathe a second, and think about what they really mean. And this thing is security in the Middle East. The reason that the Iran deal has failed was one of the reasons, apart from the US breaking a deal that was working, is that it didn't cover security in the Middle East, just the nuclear. The November conference on a binding document for a weapon of mass destruction prison in the Middle East might fail because of regional security. But what does it mean, regional security? There is no such a thing really as the Middle East. We're not a region. We're in two continents. There's no real reason of why we are the Middle East. We're not aware of shared interests of the states. We can guess what are the shared interests of some of the people in the region, mainly living in peace and prosperity and dream and have the right to pursue happiness. But really, when so many diplomats around the world, so many anchor people, so many reporters, so many people are talking about security in the Middle East, we have no idea what it means, not really. So we decided to do our own mapping of the Middle East. We're starting with looking at all the civil society organizations, and then we want to ask them questions. We want to explore the difference between a security state and human security, because usually they are in opposite. So what does it mean, security for the state, if sometimes it's the opposite of the security of the people of the state? And what states might have shared interest? How do we, as the Middle East, tackle water security and climate change, as Emad mentioned before? All these things we would like to remap as civil society, side by side with our work on the draft treaty, side by side with our work on the weapon of mass destruction free zone. We also want this opportunity to create maybe more treaties, not just for weapons of mass destruction, but those that deal with human security in the Middle East. Because when we explore this, then we will have a security to the Middle East and not security to the states buying oil from the Middle East.
True that.
I think we can try to pursue security for people in the Middle East.
And you know what it also means, Sharon? I want to just say something. You know, a lot of people say, you will hear it, that nuclear weapons provide security, that these weapons give the state a sense that they're protected. Let me tell you something. Don't believe that, because nuclear weapons are an existential threat to our human race, to our planet as we know it and what it in our environment, the humanitarian cost that comes with it. And you know what? It doesn't protect you from your enemies. You know, especially in the Middle East, Israel's government's possession of nuclear weapons does not stop Israel coming under rocket attacks from Hezbollah or Hamas or others. It doesn't stop the threats. The irony is, having nuclear weapons in a very small country, in very close proximity to population centers, that could come under attack by rockets on the nuclear facility or places where they're, hiding or keeping these nuclear warheads, can create a devastation, not just for, the enemy, but for the country and its citizens that government thinks that nuclear weapons will provide its security. So we have to turn this idea that nuclear weapons provide anything to the government and by extension to the citizens on its head. We've got to fight against that argument and say that no, nuclear weapons are a threat to our existence. And if there's a human error, if there is a terrorist attack, if there is a natural disaster like we've seen in Fukushima or Chernobyl, if there are these instances happening in the Middle East, it will be devastating. So if it cannot stop these rockets that are coming from non-state actors such as Hamas and Hezbollah, if it doesn't stop this sort of Cold War that is currently happening between Iran and Israel, if it doesn't buy security, then why do we have it? And so we got to make sure that we have the right arguments and the right facts at what nuclear weapons can do to us. And one of the studies that is really powerful and showcased the humanitarian cost of nuclear war was conducted by looking at, let's say, a country like Pakistan and India. If they start a war and they use nuclear weapons far away, thousands of kilometers and miles away from anywhere you and I would be, but if that happens, the climatic changes, this explosions of 100-size Hiroshima bombs, which, by the way, compared to what the nuclear weapons we have now, it makes the bomb dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki look like a walk in the park. So if this type of nuclear warheads are used between Pakistan and India in a localized war, the climatic change and this cooling of the atmospheric temperatures will create a famine that will cost the lives of up to 2 billion people. And those 2 billion people are not just necessarily in the proximity of India and Pakistan, it's across the world. It will damage our food security. It will damage our water resources. And not only, don't even talk about the fact that explosions initially would kill millions of people in proximity and the radiation that is then unleashed. So we have enough scientific understanding and enough arguments that nuclear weapons that were made 70 years ago and used, and we have what they have caused, that they have no place in our defense doctrines, they have no place in providing security, and we have to make sure that no one possesses them, because we cannot trust some characters that have the access to the red buttons that can unleash these weapons of mass destruction on anyone, anywhere around the world. We cannot wait until that happens. We need to stop it now. We've been very lucky thus far that we haven't destroyed ourselves. With that, Jacob, I think we are close to maybe opening it up to some comments and questions.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Sharon and Emad, for that brief overview. Sorry, it was so brief. I'm sure we could have gone on, but yeah, it was really nice to hear your views about the region, a little bit about your organisation and some of the dangers of nuclear weapons. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, so we will open up now to questions. If you have a question you want to write it in the chat, do feel free. Otherwise, obviously, like, wave your hand and Jacob or myself will get to you, and hopefully Emad and Sharon can help answer some of your queries. I'm sure both Jacob and myself have questions, so if anyone's nervous, we can go first.
I'm nervous.
Emma, do you want to kick us off then, and then I can go? Or I can.
You go first.
Okay, cool. Right, guys, hello. Thank you very much for that. Instead of asking you a question very much focused on nuclear weapons and disarmament and the WMD-free zone, I suppose it would be really interesting for me to know, and hopefully for everyone, what you feel like you've learned, what the main thing you've learned through your journey, along this journey that you've talked about today is, kind of like personally and anything like that, really. If you feel like you've gained anything or learned anything and how it's changed you. Thank you.
So for me, there were several things. First, my self-confidence. When we talk about nuclear weapons and when we talk about hard security, there are so many theories and isms and mutual assured destruction and all these theories that I kind of thought that if I don't know them and if I don't understand them, I shouldn't talk about this. I thought that I need to know how to build a bomb in order to know that we need to dismantle it. And I thought that I need to be a man in order to be heard in certain rooms, which is still true. Like, one time I entered a room and I said that I'm from the Israeli Disarmament Movement, and I was asked if I'm Sharon's secretary, because in Hebrew, Sharon is both for men and women. And what I've learned is that sadly, these theories that built the mountains of diplomacy built on them are nothing. It's just something that somebody once said and people agreed to it. And then they built mountains of diplomacy and beliefs systems that has nothing to do with reality. And that it's up to us in civil society to dismantle these mountains of fake beliefs that people have about anything that is possible or not possible in diplomacy or in anywhere, and to break the way that people ask questions automatically and to break up any automatic thinking. And I realized that this is something that is up to us, and that there's lots of strength in asking questions and not knowing the answers. And this was my journey. One of them, anyway. I mean, I am working with Emad for a few years now, so believe me, there were other journeys too.
Definitely. Easier ones. Jacob, good question.
Amazing question, by the way. I was never asked this question. Thank you.
Yeah, now I have to think. Well, Jacob, and I hope I'm not repeating some of the things that Sharon said, but you know what is really crazy is it's the ability to just say, you know what? No, we don't want nuclear weapons. And walk into the UN through a little bit of help. So that's the first thing I've learned. You need collaboration. You need allies. You need to find people that are in with you on the vision and the future of what we are trying to seek. And there's a lot of people that want also peace, security, and prosperity in the Middle East. So that's number one. Find those that will help you. You've got to remember you can't do it alone, but if you chip at it with a lot of people, you can break any wall. But if you're alone chipping at that wall, it will take you a long time. So that's why we're here. That's why our work cannot succeed without collaboration, cooperation, partnerships. That's why we have amazing NGOs that are partners with us at METO. We have incredible web of experts who are the brains that are sitting in Princeton, that are sitting elsewhere, who know exactly what a nuclear weapon can be dismantled by. They will give you a step A to Z on that. We have, civil society organizations, allies, people who give money, give their time, volunteer. So what I have learned through this journey, that number one, I can't do it alone. I need to do it with everyone with me alongside. One. Number two, I realized that once you have this support, that no door is closed to you. Sharon and I, you have to see us when we walk into the United Nations. I mean, that in itself is comical. We go in there, we sit in a packed auditorium before COVID hit, and there'll be diplomats from all around the world sitting there listening. And the first 2-3 years, they looked at us and they thought we were aliens. And then slowly they're like, there is an alternative way. And before we knew it, governments came and said, we like what you're saying. Let's help you, let's partner with you. So the second lesson I learned was that we can get into the heart of power of where the decisions are made. Don't think just because you don't know how to dismantle the nuclear bomb, as Sharon said, that you can't get in. Others will open up the door for you. Be convinced of your own beliefs and your own principles. And when you speak truth to power, with it comes with a lot of, it's incredible to actually face these governments and say, having nuclear weapons is stupid. What are you doing? Like, what are you doing? There's so much other problems we've got and you want to make nuclear weapons? Come on. And something clicks. So don't give up on those things. Number three thing that I have learned is an extension of the fact that we can change people's minds. Nothing is fixed. Change is inevitable. Change can and will continue to happen. We will age, we will die, the world will continue. But for it to continue in the projection and direction of that seeks peace and prosperity is one that you have to be true to your own principles. You have to walk there and not make it negotiable. Do not become bribed by little glitters. Be able to walk in there and say, please, click with me. Open your mind, open your perspective, expand your horizon, and see what we see. A future that actually can happen today. If you as decision makers, as representatives of our citizens, of our people, those who have power, you actually can change the fate of your country and your region with a signature. Get on it and do it. And that's where I think I have learned through this process that really nothing is impossible. And I've worked on the Iranian nuclear negotiations, and at a time when everybody thought it was a waste of time. And then I saw it actually being signed in 2015 in New York at the UN headquarters. And the text that they signed on, a little secret, was worked on by a lot of people outside of governments, but they just copy-pasted it in there. So in a similar vein, because I know some diplomats can be slightly lazy about these things and they have a lot to do, it's okay to provide them the guidelines, the mapping, and options, and let them plagiarize. Don't do that at school, but in diplomacy, it's okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Okay, it's good to hear how passionate you are about this topic. We have a question in the chat from, I think, Yarno, who was asking, I think, probably, would you consider taking Pakistan on board in non-proliferation talks with you? If they want to expand, they can, but yeah, do you have any thoughts?
Well, whoever wants to disarm, we will not say no to. I mean, I think that's the first principle. I think that for now, the Middle East should be the Middle East. Pakistan is a neighboring state. And a neighboring state to the Middle East should be part of the Middle East Pact, but not in the Middle East. So you have ways of doing it. For example, you can add a protocol about neighboring states, and you can invite Pakistan to be part, to be an observer. So yeah, of course, we will do whatever. But the Middle East is the Middle East, and Pakistan is Pakistan. Let's not reinvent the Middle East. It's complicated as it is. But there is room to talk to Pakistan, of course, also to Turkey, that is hosting NATO weapons and also is bordering the Middle East, and also to talk about a presence of other nuclear weapons in and around the Middle East, for example, American weapons. So there's more than just Pakistan.
I'll just add that, yes, geographically our focus on these 24 countries, but of course we would love everybody to disarm. But imagine if we can achieve it in the Middle East, then nobody has an excuse to say that they need these weapons of mass destruction. If we can do it in the Middle East, we can do it anywhere. And that's why it's so powerful. And what we're trying to achieve is something that has been done in terms of nuclear weapons-free zones around the world. The whole continent of Africa is a nuclear weapons-free zone. The whole continent of Latin America is a nuclear weapons-free zone. And there's a few others around the globe. And that in itself shows that it is possible. And we want to expand it to include chemical and biological weapons. And ultimately, if we succeed, and when we succeed, we will of course then use that as a precedence to ensure that we can also encourage and force other countries to disarm from their nuclear weapons. It's only in 9 countries. It's not that much. And if the Americans and the Russians make a decision to get rid of it, 92% is gone. So don't give up and don't see it as so impossible. 9 countries, simple as that, out of 195. Okay, so we've done a lot already that is on our side. And so the road ahead is not as long as many people think.
Wonderful, thank you. Yana said thank you in the chat. So yeah, I think we have time for one more. So there are no other questions in chat. So if I think I'll ask mine and then probably hand over to Jacob to wrap up. But so my question would be, I think you might have touched on it earlier, but you know, with recent events like having occurred in Afghanistan, it's become evident that non-state actors can take over states really quickly. And obviously, luckily in this case, Afghanistan, to my knowledge, doesn't have any nuclear weapons. But you know, is there a risk of a similar thing happening in one which does, and what would be the consequences of this?
So there's one way of making sure that non-state actors don't get their hands on weapons of mass destruction and then not having weapons of mass destruction. That's it. There's no other way of preventing non-state actor from possessing weapons of mass destruction. Now, even without possessing them, like in they can still build them if they get their hands on materials. So you have to have a very strong control on certain materials in the states. But there's no real way of preventing non-state actors from doing much. But there's a lot to do with why there are non-state actors, who feeds them, and what kind of regional arrangements can be done So there's less room for non-state actors. And that's again going back to security in the Middle East, a place where you see lots of non-state actors.
Emma, that's a very good question. The concerns over non-state actors having access or proliferating weapons of mass destruction has been a major issue. We see that in Syria, for example. We see it in parts of other, Libya and other parts of this failed states that we see in the Middle East. So the access to these type of weapons cannot be ruled out. Now, Afghanistan is a different story because of their history and what has happened to their country. But what is important here is that the non-state actors don't appear out of vacuum. They are there because of the fact that governments are unstable and that instability has multiple factors. We've got to go to the root of why these situations are happening. And then again, we're touching on global powers influence, proxy wars, and all these things that we've already discussed. And the most important part is that ultimately, the best way forward is for these governments to be serving their citizens instead of serving their own interest of greed, power, influence, and maintaining their sort of rule. If that is what they want to do, they put all of the necessities of what the citizens need to the side. And this is what has failed a lot of the people in the Middle East, is that their governments and the form of their governments and their governance is all based on a very elitist sort of dimension where like world powers are keeping these puppet states in power through giving them arms, giving them weapons, giving them capital and political legitimacy, whereas these governments they're not representing the interests of their people. So we need a complete transformation in the region. And that transformation, of course, extends to other countries in the global south. And that requires time, that requires change of perspectives in these world powers. And that again boils down to those citizens that actually have democratic rights in their countries, may that be in the UK, in the US, France, or elsewhere. It is those citizens that then can hold their governments responsible and say, stop weaponizing this region, stop going to endless wars in Afghanistan, stop destroying the fabric of these societies with these sophisticated weapons in our name, with our taxpayers' money. So again, here, the responsibility is broad, but one that many of you here have the power within your own communities to actually raise these issues so that it can reach your capitals or the places of power within decision-making in Washington, London, Paris, or elsewhere. And don't forget, all of those places have nuclear warheads. The British right now are trying to advance their nuclear warheads, and many other countries. But you know what? Meanwhile, there's going to be one of the longest human chains around a massive US military base in Germany that is suspected of having nuclear warheads on its base. They're building a human chain around it to visualize the need for us as coming together to point out that not on our soil. We don't need these weapons on our soil. So there's many things you can do. And if you want to learn more, reach out to the incredible Emma, Jacob, and others who have put this program together. And of course, we are at your disposal at the Middle East Treaty Organization. If you want to learn more, visit our website and reach out to us. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, really interesting answers. I think we've got to wrap up now, so I'll hand over to Jacob.
Yeah, no, perfect. Thank you very much again. And there's no further questions, and we are right at the end of our hour, which is perfect timing, really. So on behalf of Asfar, Emad, Sharon, thank you so much for coming. It was really, really interesting talk, and I hope it provided a good insight and hopefully inspired some people too. Thank you very much as well to all of our participants, everyone coming to listen today, and everyone listening to the recording. I know we had a sign up or two in New Zealand, so that's fantastic. As Emad said, and we've said before, if you are interested in learning more about METO or Asfar, I'll put the links in the chat again now. But apart from that, thank you very much for coming. It was great to see you all. Thank you.